Today we're going to do a deep dive into Alpaca Chroma. I'm going to show you exactly how to use this tool, friendly for beginners, but I'm going to go deep so that way you get a full understanding of what's possible with this incredibly powerful AI art generator. Now, unlike some of my past videos, I'm going to slow the pace a little bit on this and go a bit deeper, slower, so you can fully absorb the information in this and really get a solid start to using Alpaca Chroma. Now, on the Alpaca website, and if we ever want to actually get started, all we need to do, if we want to, is click this Get Started button, and you will be asked to sign up and get taken straight into Alpaca Chroma. Otherwise, we're going to hit sign in to go to our dashboard. Now, Alpaca are actually sponsoring this video, and there's a link in the description. But once you're logged in to get started, all you need to do is go to the Launch Now button, or you can head up to the top right and click Start Creating. And I'll get taken straight into Alpaca Chroma. Things are a little tight here because I'm zoomed in for the sake of the video, but I can start by generating from this input example to see what kind of results we get from that, or I can start with a completely blank canvas. And in most cases, I recommend, if you haven't used this before, start with the input example. And you can see it's been able to create this set of headphones from this drawing. And that gives you a bit of an idea of just how this platform works. Whatever you see here on the left will generally get generated on the right. However, you don't need to work like this. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. So you can see here we have our input and our output image. We have some presets, so controlled, which I'm going to touch on soon, and we have a prompt here, which is what Alpaca references along with the input image to create the image on the right. But how do we get to the point where we can actually start using these tools and generating these images? It's actually pretty simple to use. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here and I can clear the canvas. But keep in mind, it does keep my image and it does also keep the prompt intact there. So you need to clear the prompt. And if you want to, you can also get rid of the image. What I can essentially do though also is just simply come up the top left here to exit, re-enter, and I get asked again if I want a blank canvas or if I want to import a base image. So I'm going to go for a blank canvas right now and start fresh. Now we're going to start exploring the interface. Now you'll see a lot of the tools that you're going to be using on your canvas to draw or illustrate are all on the left here. So such as a brush tool, an eraser, there's a generative mask tool, which I'm going to run through in a little while. Also things like background fill. I can upload an image, choose a color for these tools, undo and redo. And we've already seen I can clear the canvas with this little bin icon. Now, the other thing also is at the moment we have the two windows, the input and the output. But you can actually just operate in one window if you want to. So if I come down the bottom left here and click on this single square, I can now operate on one canvas instead of having the two windows together. We will use the two for the majority of this video so you can see the input and the output at the same time, so that way you can follow along a bit more easily. And then down the bottom we have some things like presets, like the creativity allowed in our image, a prompt where we type in our prompt with a few settings. On the right is some more advanced settings. Again, you can turn that on or off. I can choose a model, which there'll be more coming soon. I can change the aspect ratio of the image and work with layers, which is very similar to Photoshop. And we're going to touch on all this stuff soon. I don't want to over-explain it right now, but the most important thing otherwise before we move on is up here. You can see where it says 98. It says 98 daily generations remaining. This means every time I create an image, I use up one of those credits. So if I generate one more image, it'll go down to 97, and I get 100 generations a day on my free account. That's a pretty generous amount for a free account. So this makes Alpaca a great place to start learning how to create AI art. So that's the basics of the interface. We're going to dive deeper into all of these tools as we go. But I do want to point out very quickly one quick usage for this tool. If you don't want to draw, you can quite easily use this as a straight up image generator. So over here under aspect ratio, what I want to do for the sake of this video is I can choose square or landscape. So I have a landscape shaped image and I can switch between the two to change the shape of the image that I want to generate. Now, if I remove this prompt here, I have put absolutely nothing into the input over here on the left. So I can come down here and type a prompt and get Alpaca to generate that exact image I'm prompting. So I've put something pretty basic in here, an astronaut floating in space, cinematic movie still. And I'm going to hit this button to generate, or I can simply hit enter on my keyboard. It will take a moment to generate that image, and you can see our image here. If I go back to our single view, it's larger and I can get a closer look at that image. That looks like a real photograph. So it shows you the power of Alpaca straight up, even just as an AI image generator. But I do have to accept this if I want to keep it on my canvas, or I can close to remove it or hide it altogether. I can download this generation to my computer quite easily. I'm going to accept it. Now we have our image here, and I can start working from there. But for now, I'm going to go and clear this, clear my prompt. We're going to look at how to actually start painting in your inputs, so that way you have more control over the images you are generating. So I have my blank input. You see here I have canvas. I can start drawing on here if I want to, but I am going to go over here to aspect ratio, change it to square, and then change this to side-by-side view, so we get a better idea of what's going on. I'm going to touch on a bit of a difference between the side-by-side view and the single view in a minute. But let's say we want to start drawing an object of some sort. We're start pretty basic. So I've got my drawing tool here. I can change the brush size, and I can basically draw what I want to, and I can take this select tool and I can even select and move that around. And that's just basically one object on a single layer. I'm just going to hit delete on my keyboard, because what I want to do is I want to draw a hand. So I'm going to basically get this tool and just kind of draw a really basic hand. Bring the brush size down. So I've drawn a really basic hand here. Once again, I'm going to get my selection tool to move that down a bit. But what if I want to clean this up a little bit? I can go down to my eraser tool, change the brush size, so make it fairly big, and you can see how big it is by the circle on screen. I'll make that a bit bigger again. I can now adjust and paint away any pieces that I don't want. So if this looks a bit sort of weird here, I can go through and make some adjustments. So now we have our hand. It's what we're going to do from here. We've painted our object in, and we've used our eraser tool. If I want to say paint some nails on there, I can change this color to maybe something like a lighter pink. That might not be the exact color we want, so I'm going to go to our draw tool. I'm going to bring the brush opacity down to something like 42%. And you can see if I hover over this edge here and just click once, it is semi-transparent. That is because we chose 42% opacity on the brush, so therefore it only actually applies that color about 42% transparency to the image. I'm going to undo or hit Control Z on my keyboard, and I'm going to just draw some nails on this hand. They don't look great. And then maybe I decide I want to draw a watch, so I change that color to black or gray. Bring my opacity back up. I have a hand wearing a watch. So that is basically how I can draw an object. I simply have my brush, I select my color down here. I can use my eraser to remove bits and pieces of that, or I can use select to grab the whole thing and move it. So I've done some basic drawing, and if I want to, I go down and I don't even have to give my image a prompt. We can actually let it try and interpret what it is I've drawn. So I'm going to click generate, and it's drawn something kind of like what we've drawn. It doesn't really know what we're trying to draw, but you get the idea. But before I go through and add a prompt, something I want to point out here is now we're in the side-by-side view. You see I have the option here to import, which will import this image over and it'll become a part of my canvas that I can actually use as an input to generate from. If I go to single view, all of a sudden we have accept, close, and hide, because now we have our generation preview. So if I was to accept this image, it would then turn into the canvas. So by hitting accept, it has brought that into the canvas, and now it says canvas. So when you go to side-by-side view, what you're seeing is the canvas on the left, generation preview on the right from the last generation. When you go to single view, you will generally see the canvas until you generate an image, and then it becomes the generation preview for you to accept or hide. So you are kind of just switching between the two windows, which is one of the reasons why I like just simply using the left and right window. However, if you are creating something that is a landscape, it might be easier, especially on a computer monitor, to work in landscape mode. But I'm going to use my select tool to select this generation, hit delete, and go back to my original hand drawing. But this time I give it a prompt. I have a picture of a cartoony hand wearing a watch. I hit generate, and now it's actually added some details onto that hand and even put a dial on the watch because it has some information to work with. Now, that is the basic of how to start painting, but there's also now presets. We want to look into the presets to see how much control we have. So down here above the prompt, you'll see there is presets: Pro, Controlled, Creative, and Wild. So essentially from left to right, we have the tightest control to basically the most creativity. So by going Pro and generating, we get something that's very close to what we've drawn. And I go up to Controlled. It's a little less close to what we've drawn. A little bit more creativity's been put into it. I go to Creative, and Alpaca is using a little bit more creativity to take that to the next level. I then hit Wild, and it's completely drawn a hand. It hasn't followed this as closely. You can see it's kind of deviated a little bit from our original drawing because now it's relying more on the prompt and less on the input image. So if we break that down, one end of the spectrum, Pro, is when you have a very detailed image that you want to match closely, and Wild is essentially when you don't want to match the image. You have a very simple or basic input that you want it to create something much more enhanced from. And Controlled and Creative are kind of like along the spectrum between those two settings. Now, I've just wanted to quickly step aside for a minute with a different image to show you a little bit more of what I mean. So by keeping this image here and selecting Pro, if I generate from that image, you'll notice that the shape is very much almost exactly in alignment with the input. But if I go from Pro all the way up to Wild, notice how our man is looking quite different. It's still referenced that image, but overall it's relied a lot more on the prompt to generate the image at hand. So that sort of gives you a better idea of the spectrum from Pro to Wild with those presets. If we look at a lot of these side by side, you can see how from Pro to Controlled to Creative to Wild, just how much it slowly deviates over the course of those presets. So that gives you an idea of what to expect across the spectrum of those presets. But if we don't want to paint, what if we want to use our own images to generate from within Alpaca Chroma? And it's a pretty simple process. All I need to do is come over here to where it says Upload Image and click that. And I can choose an image from my computer. So I choose this alien photo, hit Open. And it's a pretty decent sized photo, so it might be too big. So I'm going to hit Fit to Canvas because I can always adjust it afterwards. I hit Continue, and you see it's now fit onto the canvas. So if I enlarge this just a bit, move it into the center. Now because I have transparency either side, it will take some freedom in generating either side of that image. But here's a pretty cool trick with the color picker. If I click on the color picker here, I can choose an image. I can even input a hex code if I have that or know what that is. But essentially, I want to pick this little eyedropper here because then I can select that exact background color, get my paintbrush. I make sure my opacity is at full. And I've got a decent size and I can just paint in those edges. And because I've got a bit of detail here, but I just want to sort of change it a little bit, I'm going to come down here and type my prompt. I have a cinematic still of an alien wearing headphones, Unreal Engine. I've kept it on Controlled because I want it to be about the same shape. So I'm going to hit Generate, and we've effectively used our image to create this alien. And you can see the shape is pretty close. If you think it's a little too far gone in one direction, I can always dial it back to Pro. And you're quite often going to have to try a few times simply because whenever you do an AI image generation on any platform, there's still a little bit of a roll of the dice. So until you get used to what to expect, it can be harder to get images straight up. But with this one, we're going to hit Pro to dial it back a bit. And this is looking really spot on. So now I'm going to quickly download my image by heading to these three dots, clicking Download Generation. I click Save. And now we can see on my files here, I have my generation and the quality is pretty good. And if you're wondering what size we get from these images, using the square aspect ratio, you get an image of 1024 by 1024. But if I switch to this second image, which I've generated, it's actually 1344 by 768. So they're about the same resolution with the same number of pixels in the image, but just a different proportion. So that's something to keep in mind when you're downloading images from Chroma as well, is the size of these images. And later on, I'm going to touch on some tips to upscale them if you want to take it further and get a higher resolution image. So now you've got the basics down pat of how the system actually works. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the editing, drawing process, so that way you can start to enhance your skills with Alpaca Chroma. So we're going to dive a bit deeper and start off with some drawing tips. Now, before I start drawing, I do want to mention one thing. As I've mentioned before, when you have something that's transparent and you enter a prompt such as jungle, you'll produce an image. But one thing you can do if you need a background to work from, you can come here to background fill and you can choose the background color of your canvas. So now if I quickly draw something onto that canvas and regenerate that prompt, you can actually start to work with a background color as it is. So that is pretty handy. But we're going to wipe that clean and start with a transparent background, because I believe it has a lot more flexibility when we're creating images. So we already know how to draw onto the canvas. So if I decided I wanted to draw a person's head here, what I could do is simply get my brush tool, pick a skin color, and as before, I'm going to grab a pretty big brush and draw a basic shape for the head. And then I might add in a few details such as hair, eyes, and nose. So I'm going to go here, pick a darker color for the hair. I want to add an ear in here, so I'm going to go back, pick this color, and just kind of add an ear in there. Now this is just one way of drawing. There's more than one way to do this, but this is just something that can help you sort of to better illustrate an image. I'm going to add a bit more down here. And now we have a basic shape which doesn't look like a head at all. And like I said before, we can go through with our eraser and tidy this up. But before we do, what I'm going to do is go back to our brush tool and I can start to add in some highlights. So what we can do now is actually go to our skin color and choose a lighter skin tone, grab our brush, and we can adjust the size to something smaller. We can even bring the opacity down if we want to, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it where it is. And I can actually start to draw in some highlights. So if I've got light coming from this side, I'm going to draw in a bit of a shape down here. Highlight the nose a little bit, maybe some of the forehead. I can even bring the brush size up, opacity down. I might even just tap away and get a bit of a fade. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and continue drawing in some highlights around some of the objects on the image. And then in this, I'm going to go and choose a darker color. And because it's skin, I'm going to add a little bit more pinkness to it. And I basically do the same thing with the shadows, but also add some highlights to the hair. Do the same with the shadows. And one little tip, when you're painting, if you look at the size of my brush here, if I use these square brackets on my keyboard, I can make the brush bigger or smaller, choosing the left bracket to go smaller and the right bracket to go bigger. And this is a massive time saver. So I've got some highlights and shadings here and it's a little bit messy, but now that I've drawn that all in, I can then get my eraser and start to chop away at the bits I don't want. I can smooth out some areas. So if I've got the face here, I can come in and just very nice and smooth out that area and come down. Once again, using my square brackets to change brush size. So you can start to see how we've created the shape of a head. And once again, if I want to, I can go nice and dark and add in the finer details. Now I've got some basic shading in there. I can get some really finer brush details in there. So things like around the mouth, I can actually draw in the nose, eyes, and even eyebrows. So again, I come up to our hair color here, square brackets, start to draw in some eyebrows, and just continue to make little adjustments to the picture. And just to finish off the eyes, I'm going to go for not quite white, because it wouldn't be quite that bright in reality. Bring my brush size up and just kind of draw in some basic eyes. Add in a little touch of white. Then we can draw in some pupils. So I've drawn a face here now. So that's just a few drawing tips. Things like adding in highlights and shadows, using opacity in some areas. This does look pretty rough. But even if I go with controlled and type in a prompt, a man looking to one side with brown hair, I hit generate, and you can see how closely it's been able to follow along with the shape of that image. Now, this might not be great because I have drawn this, so therefore some of the proportions are a little bit funny, but the actual details are pretty spot on. So if I decided that wasn't quite what I wanted, once again, I start moving up the presets, regenerate, and we've literally been able to create an image from our drawing and it looks like an actual photograph. But what about changing the background? There's one tip I think is very useful for that, and I'm going to basically click import on here to bring this over to my canvas. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to touch on layers over here. If you look over here on the right, you'll notice that these layers here, there's one with a man looking to one side, that is the prompt. I can click over here to duplicate that layer. I can move it back or forward, or I can just drag and drop to move it up and down. So I move it down and it sits behind our drawing. I can change the order and I can delete the layer, send backwards. But to give you an idea, your prompt is going to be what is the name of the layer, and any of the numbered layers is going to be basically what you draw or import. So from here, I'm going to actually turn off layer 1 because I want to get my eraser tool. And there's a reason for this, which I'll just quickly touch on. If I erase straight through the middle here, notice I had layer 1 selected and nothing happened. If I click on this layer here and then I erase through that, it will erase that layer. I can turn the layer back on and see what's underneath. If I have both layers turned on, it will erase both layers, as it tends to basically edit every layer underneath that as well. So that's important to understand. If you want to edit a layer, I recommend turning off the other layers. So I'm going to undo until we get back to our original image. So what I'm going to do now is, if I want to add a background to this, I'm just going to basically use my eraser to erase around the subject. Now I've done it with a thinner brush. I now increase the brush size to remove the rest of the background much quicker. So now I have our man cut out, and there's a few different ways that I can add in this background. The simplest way is to simply keep my prompt the way it is down the bottom here. I add comma with a busy city street behind him, and I can click generate. And you'll notice it's added a busy street in behind him. However, it has regenerated our man. So we may or may not want that, but there's still more we can do. For one, I can still import this image. We have our layers over here. I can just pop this one behind the other one, and it can be a little bit rough around the edges, but that's one way you can kind of add in details. It's not the preferred way, but that is one way you can do it. What I do recommend is turning off this second layer and even turning off all of the layers, because what you can do then is essentially rewrite the prompt to only include, say, a busy street in New York, and then we can regenerate. We have our busy street. So I can import, move that down and turn on our layer, and then that's behind him. However, the edges are a little bit rough. And this is where I'm going to touch on Generation Mask. Generation Mask is a handy tool for editing images. Essentially, I can use it to paint over areas of the image I want to change, and it will actually keep the areas that are unpainted completely untouched. So there's two ways we're going to use this. We're going to sort of fix this up with Generation Mask. Now this is the tool here for Generation Mask. I can alter the change amount, and that will sort of determine how much gets changed for where I've painted. I'm just going to leave it at full for now, and this brush size is pretty good. So if I want to blend this in, I can simply trace around the edges, and in this instance I would even remove the prompt completely and just hit generate, and it will blend the edges into the background, which is pretty cool. But there's yet another step that we can take. If that background is not quite what we wanted, before we get rid of this, I can keep adding to it from here, or if I need to, I can click here, I can clear the mask to get rid of it completely, which I'm not going to do. I'm going to actually paint, bring my brush size up and paint the entire background with the Generation Mask. And you don't need to actually have this background in place. I can turn it off if I want to, leave it on, it doesn't matter. And instead I can paint around the figure completely. And then I go back into my prompt. I've got a man with brown hair, busy city street in New York behind him. So now it knows there's a man there. So the AI will actually make a better reference. So where it's up here, it looks like he's very high up in the air. Knowing there is a photo of a man in the center means that the AI will actually probably make a more fitting scene. So now when I hit generate, he's now on the ground level, blended in, and the facial features are all the same. So that gives you a little bit of a rundown on how Generation Mask works, and also the basics of layers and changing the backgrounds on your images. Now I want to take a quick little sidestep for a minute, because one thing I didn't touch on when I first recorded this is if I go into my Generation Mask, the change amount will reflect different levels of change in the image. So if I decide to go with a 10% change amount, increase my brush size, and I draw on the eyes here, you can see it's very faint, almost hard to see at 10%. But if I type what I want to see down the bottom here and generate, you notice it doesn't look very different at all. I've put human eyes and it's barely changed. But if I bring that change amount up to say 37%, paint again, regenerate, notice how the eyes start to change a little bit further. And of course, just to really finish it off, I bring it back up to 100%, go over the eyes, generate again, and we get completely different looking eyes again. So if you want to make subtle changes, keeping that change amount down is really good, and adjust it upwards if you want to make more drastic changes when using Generation Mask. So before I get even more in depth, I want to touch on working in iterations, something that works really well with Alpaca. And what we can do essentially is I've got my image here still, I click import, and now we can start to work from this image. So this is where we can start to make more adjustments. Now, one thing you can do is we can go back to control to keep it relatively controlled. But what I can do is change his hair from brown. I can change my prompt to say a man with blonde shiny hair. I hit generate, and we've been able to change that image without altering it drastically. I can import again, and this is the iteration. I then decide I want to add sunglasses, so I can change my prompt, or I can simply draw onto the image. So I'll choose something like bright red and draw some frames. Draw some semi-transparent black. So I've drawn some sunglasses, add a little bit of a highlight. So now he has sunglasses. So I can now say, with sunglasses, red frames on the sunglasses. Hit generate, and the sunglasses are looking pretty bodgy because it's actually uncontrolled. So I move it up to creative, and now the sunglasses look like actual sunglasses. I import again. Now, this is where it starts to get a bit of fun. With working in iterations, we can start to explore different styles. So at the moment, it is simply a man with sunglasses. I'm going to change it, get rid of the red frames information there. I'm going to say DSLR photo and hit generate, and it hasn't changed a lot. It's kept it pretty tight. But I can continue to import, and you can see how it's slightly different, and I keep changing the style. Cinematic movie still, import, change the style again, move back to controlled, comic book art, and you see it's starting to look like a comic book. I import, and if I feel like this doesn't look enough like what I want, I can either crank up the presets, or what I can do is what I call recycling, a part of working in iterations. So I simply generate again, import, generate from that import, and I can continue to repeat that process until I get the result that I want. But coming back to about here, keep in mind, if you're working in iterations, your generations are all here in your layers, so you can always cycle back to one that you like. I think this one looks pretty good. I love the contrast of it. And again, I can go back to changing style. Going for a 3D look like Unreal Engine. This time I'll bring it up to creative. And you can see how we've got that style now looking a little bit more 3D. And again, I import, regenerate, and I can use those iterations and the recycling method to slowly transform my image with a little bit more control. But I do want to touch a little bit more on the idea of changing styles of your image. I'm going to just simply drag and drop a photo into my canvas. You can see we have a woman's face. And again, I type a prompt that describes the photo. I have a woman wearing glasses in the city. And now I can again start with a different style. So if I want to try some, say, Ukiyo A type art, submit, I've been able to convert that to more of a Ukiyo A style. And again, I can import that and keep it, or I can still try other styles again. So again, I can change Ukiyo A to 3D Pixar movie, and we get like a Pixar style. And this is still uncontrolled. If I take it up to creative and try again, it'll take that look a little bit further. And I can continue to cycle through to a black and white pencil sketch, or even a watercolor painting. So you can see how taking a simple photo or an image, you can actually restyle things pretty effectively. But if I wipe this out completely and start again, and I'm going to create something over here on the left. I have a cute cat, Pixar character, and we create this cat. If I import that image, this has been touched on before, but it's actually a really powerful tool for changing some of the elements in a character. So even if I come back to controlled and I add grey fur. You see it started to sort of grey it up a little bit, but we haven't quite got the transformation we're after. So again, we always have to sort of try things out. I go to creative this time, submit. Now we have grey fur. I can change that to black fur, and we get a bit more black fur in the image. And of course, if you really needed to crank it up, you can still go up to wild and get something a little bit more full on, but we still have something in line with our original image, down to the little hairs sticking up on top of the ears. But what I really like, I'm going to take it back to creative, and I'm going to type in cute baby tiger cub, Pixar character, tiger, and we've converted that cat into a tiger. And in the past, what I've also done is change it from a cat into a puppy. So now we have a puppy. So you can take some of these things and kind of change them slightly over time. And again, I can even change it to lion, a cute lion, Pixar character, puffy mane, submit. And I've been able to create a line that kind of looks a bit like a dog. But then we can go back to the iterations. I can import, hit it again. We're looking a bit better. I import, hit it again. And I've been able to sort of slowly deviate away from the original, but still keep the essence of the pose intact. Now, what about combining these tools? Putting it all together to show you the power of this editor when you understand how to bounce from tool to tool. I have some images right here, which I'm going to use to sort of build an image. So I'm going to basically drag and drop this kitchen background in, fit to canvas, and that's looking pretty good. I'm missing a little bit of information here from the bottom, so I'm going to grab my Generative Mask, and I'm going to just bring that brush size up a bit and color it in. And for a bit of consistency, I'm just going to also paint around some of these objects. Now type in kitchen countertop, wood grain, submit, and we can use this to kind of extend off our image, which is pretty handy. One of the really cool things is I can start importing transparent PNGs. So the images I showed you before, I have this T here, fit to canvas. I now, because of my layer system here, I can see this image. I can resize and basically put in a cup of tea here with some lemon. And to make it a little bit fancy, I can bring in this water, fit to canvas. And because I have my select tool, I can move that around, grab this top area here and even rotate so the water comes sort of shooting out a little bit. It's a little bit hard to see, but I'm going to come down, create a new layer, drag that layer underneath the water, and I can start to paint in some areas behind the water to make it stand out. I can change to blue. I can get that watery effect kind of coming out of the kettle. So I now have all these mixed elements on the actual input here, and I can even draw something. So if I grab, say, some gray, I draw a little, say, mouse character here on the left. I can then basically use this as a full scene, and I can keep it under control. We'll see what results we get. We're going to type in a prompt that describes the scene I'm after. I have a mouse on a kitchen countertop. We can see the mouse with a cup of tea with water shooting out, lemons around the tea. I hit generate and see we've been able to create the scene pretty closely to what we've drawn. And if I head up to creative, it looks even better and still follows that scene. I can import, and then of course I can start changing styles as well, like comic book art of a mouse in the kitchen countertop. And you see how it's added a bit of contrast to that, and we can use our iterations to slowly bring that to life in the way that we want. So you can actually combine a whole bunch of elements in to make it work the way you want it to. Now, I do want to touch on downloading your images a little bit deeper than what I mentioned before. But just to touch on it again, I've got my generation here, and if I want to save it, if I download the generation, I get the single image just like this. But if I click on download side-by-side view, I get both images side by side. And even if I switch to single view, you'll find the options are the same. But one really handy tool is if I'm working from a particular point, if I come up here to download canvas, I'm going to call this one canvas. There's something that happens if I decide to leave this editor altogether. If I go back in, my canvas has been reset. But I can decide to go to import a base image, pick my canvas, and I can basically pick up where I left off. So it's handy to save your canvas, even if it is just some of your base drawings, because now I can say a dark evil mouse making tea and continue to work from there. The only problem is you do lose your layers, so you don't get a chance to keep that layer structure, but it is something that if you are working on something and chipping away at it, you can save your canvas as you go to re-import and continue at another stage, which is very handy when using these sorts of tools, which it's kind of difficult to be able to save what you're working on. Now I'm going to share some prompt tips that can help you basically write better prompts and get better images using Alpaca. So first of all, there's nothing wrong with any prompt formula if you're getting what you're after, but there are certain degrees of control and sort of adjustment that you can use to further improve your prompts. So for example, I can type in a dog on a skateboard and I get this image. It's not really what I was after in my head, but it still looks photorealistic, and Alpaca's done a great job of creating what I've asked for. However, one of the formulas that works really well is actually having the subject, which is the most important part of the image first, because you want to try and add the most important elements to the front of your prompt. So I have the subject, I then go into details of the subject, and then I'll go into the scene, so surrounding scene, and then the style of the image is a really good formula. So for the subject, I have dog on a skateboard. For details, I have a brown dog wearing sunglasses. For the scene, I'll say at a skate park. And for style, I can say children's book illustration. Now when I hit submit, I get the type of dog I want, I get the scene in the background, and I get the style of image I'm after. There's one more thing you can try, and that is a few more phrases that you can use to actually position the photo the way you want. So I can use photographic terms for this. So something like I've added portrait layout. So now it looks like a portrait. But keep in mind that if you're using Chroma, drawing in the layout you want is probably going to be your best bet. But this is just something that will help you frame up as well if you're looking to get some results quickly. I can change it from portrait layout to top view. You see that our image is positioned from high, looking down. I can try something like fisheye lens, and we get that kind of fisheye lens effect where the dog is really close to the camera. I can say extreme close-up, and we get a nice close-up of the dog. So another thing to consider is that even if you are just straight up prompting, you don't have to just prompt. So I'm going to keep it in single view for a while, just while I'm doing this particular image, because it is wide. I click accept. I can click on this image, and maybe I decide I want more scenery off to the left. I can just simply move him off to the right. Again, I get my generation mask, bring the size up, and this time I say a cat on a skateboard if I wanted to add something in there, or I can just simply say a skate park, children's book illustration to fill in that area. And some of this looks a bit blank too, so we'll cover some of that. Generate. So you can actually use the Chroma tool to move things around and frame them how you want. You can make the dog smaller, or you can zoom in on the dog. You've got so many options when it comes to framing this image. Again, if I accept, but I decide that I want this image to be larger, you can just see these little handles down here. I can zoom right in, and we have our original layer here if I want to get real close on the dog. The difference is there's now a lack of quality because we're zoomed in. So if I bring it back to Pro and I type in a dog wearing sunglasses, a skate park, children's book illustration, I can just use that as a reference to regenerate. And that helps us to regenerate our image framed up the way we like. So again, if you're looking for, now I've put here children's book illustration. If you're looking for more styles, there is a video I'll pop in the description below, but also at the end of this video so you can explore those styles and how well they work with Alpaca. But let's keep moving ahead with the video. So I want to touch on a few use cases again for Alpaca that you might find useful. Now we know, obviously, we can draw an image and simply render from our drawing. However, we can also import our own artwork and restyle it into something such as a 3D render, or maybe even anime, or some other style. Like I said, there's a video I'm going to pop on soon. But we can also use it as an AI photo editor. We can take Generative Mask, import a photo, draw elements onto the screen, and then highlight them with Generative Mask and actually do photo edits using our photo editor. And that is just using all of the techniques that we've discussed. And of course, you can combine these methods, as we have also touched on. There are so many uses for this tool, and I hope that you've been able to really grab something from this video that helps you go off and make that image that you need using the elements you have. Now, there is a lot in this video. I've tried to slow things down so that we can go in depth and you can really build your skill set using Chroma. So I highly recommend that you save this video to a playlist so you can come back and check it out at any time to sort of retrace your steps and figure out where you're going. I will have some chapters at the bottom of the video you can refer to, and that can help you sort of come back and really master this platform. If you are looking for a way to get started, I have one more little thing I want to run through with you that can help you to just sort of get a little bit of a feel for this platform if you've never used it before. And considering everything we've touched on, the last thing I want to mention is if you're in Alpaca, you can come over to this little light bulb section over here. And there are some input examples. Now you can go through, import any of these, and you have an image to start with. It also gives you a prompt, and you can basically generate with that default setting. And you can see here, they've put here lime green. It shows how you can change the color of the vehicle. So you can now go through and just simply have a bit of a play. So I can say here, purple by Honda, submit, and I can start to experiment with this platform. So having something to start with and just testing out your ideas. I recommend exploring, trying things out, experimenting, because you will get an understanding of what Alpaca does. And before you know it, you'll be diving in deep, hitting that flow state and really learning how this platform works. So again, I want to thank Alpaca for sponsoring this video. And if you like the video, please consider giving it a like. Check out Alpaca. There is a link in the description. Otherwise, I hope you have a great day. And thanks for taking the time to go through this video, cover this platform in depth. And I hope to see you again soon with another video covering Alpaca. Have a great day and thanks for watching.